What happens when a nation is born in chains, yet dares to break them with its own hands? This is the story of Haiti, a land that endured slavery, colonization, betrayal, earthquakes, poverty, and silence. But also, a land of unbreakable dignity, of rebellion that shook empires, of a people who never surrendered even when the world abandoned them. If you've ever felt ignored, silenced, or pushed down, this story is also yours. Because Haiti is more than suffering. It is defiance. It is resistance. It is the echo of freedom itself. And in this video, we will walk through the complete history of Haiti. A history that does not just move you, it transforms you. Long before European sails cut across the Atlantic, before the word Haiti was ever spoken by foreign tongues, there was Haiti, the land of high mountains. It was a name whispered by its first people, the Taino, who had paddled northward centuries earlier from the coasts of South America. For them, this island was not a possession to conquer or a prize to hoard. It was home. The Taino lived in harmony with the lush hills and turquoise coasts. They did not measure wealth in bars of gold or silver, but in fertile soil, clean rivers, and the songs of birds greeting the sunrise. Their houses were built from wood and palm, clustered in villages called ucaiques, where families worked together under the guidance of their caciques, or chiefs. Corn, cassava, sweet potatoes, and beans filled their fields. The sea offered fish, while the forests gave fruits, herbs, and wild game. Work was steady, but it was never punishment. It was life's rhythm, guided by the cycles of the sun and the moon. In their mythology, Yukahu, the spirit of cassava and fertility, and Atabe, the goddess of waters and the moon, were protectors and providers. When the harvest came, the Taino danced and sang, their music echoing with the steady beat of drums and maracas, weaving community into every note. Their spirituality was not an escape from reality, but a language for it. Every river had a soul, every tree a spirit, every mountain a guardian. To live well was not to dominate nature, but to remain in balance with it. Children grew up listening to stories, parables that taught respect, generosity, and care for the earth. In these lessons, there was wisdom. True survival came not from greed, but from harmony. The Taino world was not idyllic perfection. Conflicts existed, as they do in every society, but it was a world in which the center of life was cooperation, not conquest. Anthropologists today often point to their communal way of living as a system that prioritized collective well-being over personal gain. And in that sense, the Taino represented something Europe, with its rising empires and endless hunger for wealth, had already forgotten. Imagine for a moment what the island looked like before European eyes laid claim to it. Mountains clothed in green, rivers shimmering in the Caribbean sun, canoes gliding silently across the waves, children laughing in the villages, women weaving baskets, men carving canoes from giant trees. At night, under starlit skies, bonfires lit up the circle of dancers, their movements telling stories older than memory. This was Haiti, a living, breathing paradise, sustained by the humility of its people. But paradise is always fragile when greed is near. Beyond the horizon, sails had already been raised. The Taino could not know that in a single generation, their world would be shattered, that their songs would be drowned out by chains, their gods mocked by foreign priests, their fertile soil stripped for gold and sugar. In retrospect, Haiti before Columbus feels almost mythical, as though it belonged to another universe entirely. And in some sense, it did. It was a universe where land was not owned but shared, where value was measured in community and nature, not profit. But in 1492, as white sails pierced the Caribbean horizon, this balance was about to face a storm unlike anything the island had ever known. The Taíno could not imagine that the men arriving carried not only crosses and steel, but an entire worldview built on domination and extraction. Their island, once abundant and sacred, would soon be renamed, reshaped, and turned into a stage for one of history's darkest tragedies. Still, it is important to remember this first chapter. For Haiti was not born from chains alone. It was born from the memory of a free people whose language, spirit, and connection to the land left traces that still survive in Haitian culture today. In the resilience of farmers, in the rhythm of drums, in the very name Haiti, the Taíno endure. And so, before the darkness came, there was light. Before the shackles, there was freedom. Before Columbus, there was Haiti. It was December of 1492, when the horizon of Haiti broke with an unfamiliar sight. 3 massive ships, sails like white wings gliding against the blue of the Caribbean. To the Taíno, they must have looked like floating islands, strange visitors from a world beyond imagination. To Christopher Columbus, they were the first step into what he thought was Asia, and the beginning of a conquest that would forever scar this land. When Columbus stepped ashore on the northern coast, he was stunned by what he saw. The island seemed like an untouched jewel. Lush green mountains, rivers sparkling in the sun, fertile valleys, and a climate so warm it felt eternal. But what truly caught his attention was not the land's beauty. It was the glimmer of gold. The Taíno, generous by nature, offered gifts to the newcomers, small ornaments and trinkets made of the metal they used more for decoration than for power. For the Spaniards, it was enough. Columbus wrote to Ferdinand and Isabella that he had found not just a new land, but a land rich with gold. And with those words, Haiti's fate was sealed. The first European settlement in the Americas rose here, La Navidad, built from the remains of the ship Santa Maria that had run aground. At first, the Taíno welcomed the strangers with food, shelter, and hospitality. They had no reason to fear. But the Spaniards' hunger for gold, labor, and control quickly transformed the encounter into something darker. Columbus and his men demanded more than generosity. They demanded obedience. What began as friendly exchange turned into forced tribute. Every Taíno over the age of 14 was ordered to deliver a quota of gold every 3 months. Those who failed faced brutal punishments: mutilation, whipping, or execution. It was the imposition of a foreign system the Taíno had never known: domination through fear. Within a few short years, the Spaniards established the system of encomienda, a structure that pretended to offer protection and Christianization, but in reality meant enslavement. Taíno men were forced into mines, digging endlessly for gold. Women were pressed into domestic labor, or worse, their bodies treated as spoils of conquest. Families were torn apart, villages emptied, and the rhythm of communal life shattered. The consequences were catastrophic. Diseases carried unknowingly by the Europeans, smallpox, measles, influenza, spread like wildfire through a population that had no immunity. Hunger followed, as fields lay untended under the demands of forced labor. Despair set in, as the world the Taíno had built for centuries unraveled in less than a generation. Historians estimate that within 50 years of Columbus's arrival, the Taíno population of Hispaniola plummeted from hundreds of thousands, perhaps even 1 million. to only a few thousand survivors. It was one of the earliest genocides of the Americas, a silent catastrophe that erased an entire people almost overnight. Columbus, hailed in Europe as a discoverer, became in reality the harbinger of annihilation for Haiti. The island was renamed Hispaniola, a Spanish possession, no longer the sacred land of the Taíno, but a colony for extraction. Its rivers still flowed, its mountains still stood, but the people who had named them, who had sung to their spirits, were vanishing. And yet, even in tragedy, memory clung to the soil. The word Haiti itself would survive, buried like an ember under the ashes, waiting centuries to rise again as a banner of resistance. To imagine the shift is almost unbearable. From laughter around Taíno fires to silence under Spanish whips. From rituals under the moon to prayers whispered in fear. The island, once a paradise of abundance and harmony, had become the stage of cruelty. But Spain's triumph was never as permanent as it believed. Though the Taíno were nearly extinguished, the land would not remain silent. In its forests, its mountains, its coasts, new voices would rise. First from pirates, then from Africans brought in chains, and later from rebels who would one day burn the plantations to the ground. The sails of Columbus brought not only conquest, but the beginning of a cycle: empire, exploitation, resistance. And that cycle was about to intensify. For Spain's grip would weaken, and in the shadows, another European power was already preparing to seize the western half of the island. The peace of the Taíno was broken forever, but the spirit of resistance had just begun to awaken. By the late 1500s, the Spanish grip on Hispaniola was already loosening. Gold mines had been depleted, the Taíno population nearly annihilated, and Spain's ambitions stretched further into the vast riches of Mexico and Peru. Hispaniola, once a jewel of conquest, had become a neglected outpost. And in the Caribbean, a neglected colony was an invitation. From the north came shadows on the sea, pirates and buccaneers, hungry men who made their living on the lawless waters. They were English, Dutch, and most notably, French. They raided Spanish galleons heavy with treasure, stormed coastal settlements, and carved out havens wherever the Spanish patrols were weakest. Among these havens was a small island just off Haiti's northern coast, Tortuga. Tortuga became infamous, a rough, brutal society where men lived by the cutlass and the musket. Here, French buccaneers hunted wild cattle and pigs, smoked the meat to preserve it, and sold it to passing ships. The very word buccaneer comes from the boucan, the wooden frame they used to smoke the meat. What began as survival soon grew into a thriving outlaw economy. From Tortuga, these men launched attacks against the Spanish, bleeding their empire one ship at a time. By the mid-1600s, the pirates were no longer just raiders, they were settlers. The French crown, seeing opportunity, moved to support them. What began as lawless plunder evolved into a strategy: weaken Spain, plant roots, and claim the western half of Hispaniola. In 1697, the Treaty of Ryswick formally ended one of Europe's many wars, and in the process, redrew the map of the Caribbean. Spain ceded the western third of Hispaniola to France. It was the birth of Saint-Domingue, the colony that would, within a century, become the richest in the world and the cruelest. Saint-Domingue's soil was perfect for sugar. In the late 17th and early 18th centuries, as European demand for sugar, coffee, and indigo skyrocketed, the French transformed the colony into a plantation machine. Fortunes poured into France. Merchants in Bordeaux and Nantes grew rich. Parisian salons buzzed with the aroma of Haitian coffee. and French aristocrats adorned themselves with goods that had been harvested under a Caribbean sun. But behind this dazzling wealth lay horror. The riches of Saint-Domingue depended on slave labor imported from Africa. Tens of thousands, and eventually hundreds of thousands, of men, women, and children were torn from their homes across West Africa, chained in the holds of ships and delivered to this new French colony like cargo. The pirates had once fought for freedom of plunder. Now the French had institutionalized a far darker economy. And yet, in its early days, Saint-Domingue was still a place of contradictions. French colonists built grand houses in Port-au-Prince and Cap Français, spoke of Enlightenment ideals, and prided themselves on being at the cutting edge of European culture. But only a short walk away, in the cane fields, enslaved Africans toiled from sunrise to sunset, whipped and beaten, their lives shortened to a few brutal years. The Spanish had used Hispaniola as a base of extraction. The French would make their half into the beating heart of a global economy. By the 18th century, Saint-Domingue was supplying nearly half the world's sugar and much of its coffee. It was, as one historian later wrote, the pearl of the Antilles. But pearls are formed under pressure, and this pearl gleamed brightest because it was polished with blood. The irony was stark. The Enlightenment in France spoke of liberty, equality, and fraternity. But in Saint-Domingue, liberty was a dream denied to the majority, equality a crime punishable by death, fraternity a lie drowned beneath the crack of the whip. Still, in the hills and forests of the colony, whispers began. Enslaved Africans, though torn from different tribes and languages, shared songs, drums, and stories. They rebuilt fragments of their cultures, blending African traditions with the Catholic rituals forced upon them. Out of this fusion rose Vodou, a spiritual lifeline, a faith that carried memory and resistance in its heartbeat. Saint-Domingue was no longer the abandoned island Spain had left behind. It was now the crown jewel of France's empire, a colony that filled European coffers and made French nobles dream of Caribbean wealth. But the foundation was rotten. Beneath the glitter of riches lay the suffering of a people whose cries were ignored in Versailles, but whose determination was quietly hardening. The pirates had once shown that empires could be challenged. Soon, the enslaved would prove that even empires could be overthrown. By the 18th century, Saint-Domingue had become the envy of Europe. Ships left its harbors stacked with sugar, coffee, indigo, and cotton, commodities that sweetened French tables, scented aristocratic salons, and clothed noble families. To Paris, Bordeaux, and Nantes, the colony was a miracle, a machine that produced unimaginable wealth. But for those who lived and died in its fields, it was not a miracle at all. It was hell on earth, disguised as paradise. The heart of this machine was the sugar plantation. To keep them running, France imported over 800,000 enslaved Africans between the 17th and 18th centuries, more than anywhere else in the Caribbean. They were captured in West and Central Africa, chained in the dark holds of slave ships, and forced across the Atlantic on journeys so brutal that thousands never even survived the crossing. Those who did arrive found no freedom at the end of the voyage, only another kind of death. Life expectancy for a slave in Saint-Domingue was less than 10 years. The work was relentless. From the first light of dawn, men, women, and children were driven into the cane fields. Under the tropical sun, they cut and hauled stalks of sugar cane with machetes so heavy they blistered their hands raw. The air was thick with heat, insects, and the acrid sting of sweat. Overseers, armed with whips, stalked the rows, lashing anyone who slowed, faltered, or simply collapsed from exhaustion. At night, the work did not stop. In the boiling houses, Enslaved laborers fed cane juice into massive cauldrons, standing over heat so intense it peeled the skin from their bodies. Burns were common, infections fatal. Sugar, sweet for Europe, was paid for with the bodies of Africans in Saint-Domingue. The Code Noir, the Black Code written by the French crown, outlined the rules for slavery. In theory, it required masters to provide food and shelter, to baptize slaves into Christianity, and to avoid excessive cruelty. In reality, it became a legal shield for violence. Any act of resistance, from running away to refusing an order, could be punished with whipping, mutilation, even death. Slaves were property, not people. The women of Saint-Domingue bore a double burden. They were worked as hard as men in the fields, but at night many were subjected to sexual violence at the hands of overseers and masters. Children born of these abuses carried the scars of a society that saw them not as human beings, but as categories: mulatto, quadroon, octoroon, labels that divided skin tones into hierarchies of privilege and oppression. And yet, even in this inferno, the enslaved carried with them the seeds of defiance. They brought their languages, their songs, their dances, their gods. Around secret fires at night, they remembered Africa. They spoke of ancestors, sang in rhythms that no whip could silence, and invoked the spirits of voodoo for protection and strength. In these gatherings, they created not only faith, but identity, a shared memory that turned despair into survival, and survival into resistance. The colonists lived in mansions, drank fine wine, and sent their children to schools in France. They convinced themselves their wealth was proof of superiority, that slavery was natural, even ordained by God. But the numbers told a different story. By the late 18th century, enslaved Africans made up over 90% of the colony's population. The masters were outnumbered, their power held together only by fear and violence. It was a fragile empire of sugar and chains. For every lash, for every humiliation, for every life consumed by the cane fields, anger smoldered. Runaways, called Marins, fled into the mountains, forming hidden communities where freedom was carved from the wilderness. These Maroons became symbols of hope for those still in bondage. Their survival was proof that another life was possible, that slavery was not destiny. The French called Saint-Domingue their pearl of the Antilles, but pearls are formed through irritation, through pain. The brilliance of this pearl was stained by blood. The very system that enriched France sowed the seeds of its destruction. No society can be built forever on the suffering of millions without consequence. By the late 18th century, Saint-Domingue was a colony stretched to its breaking point. Sugar was sweet, but the bitterness beneath it was growing unbearable. In the fields, in the forests, in the secret ceremonies under the moon, the enslaved began to whisper, "Freedom." And soon, those whispers would turn into a roar that shook the world. By 1791, the colony of Saint-Domingue was a powder keg waiting for a spark. The enslaved made up the overwhelming majority of the population. Hundreds of thousands of Africans and their descendants, bent under the lash, starved, beaten, and dehumanized. They cut the sugar, harvested the coffee, and built the wealth of France. Yet they were denied the most basic right of all: freedom. Every day, their lives were reduced to endless labor and brutal punishment. But every night, in the secrecy of the forests and hills, they found each other. They sang, drummed, and remembered Africa. They prayed to the spirits of voodoo, asking for strength, asking for deliverance. Whispers of rebellion grew with every lash of the whip. Then came the night that changed history. On August 22nd, 1791, In a clearing known as Bois Cayman, near the city of Le Cap, hundreds of enslaved men and women gathered in secret. The air was thick with the humidity of the tropics, the scent of rum and smoke rising with the rhythm of drums. It was more than a meeting. It was a ritual, a covenant. At the center stood a Vodou priest, remembered as Duddy Boukman, alongside a priestess whose name has been lost, but whose presence lingers in the memory of the Haitian people. They called upon the spirits, upon the ancestors, upon the God who had made all people free. Boukman's words echoed through the night. The God who created the sun that gives us light, who stirs the sea and makes the thunder roar. He sees all that the whites do. Our God, who is good and just, orders us to seek vengeance. He will guide our arms and give us victory. Throw away the image of the God of the whites, who thirsts for our tears. Listen to the voice of liberty, which speaks in the heart of us all. Those words were more than a sermon. They were a declaration of war. Men and women who had once been told they were nothing more than property lifted their machetes and swore an oath to never again submit to chains. Lightning split the sky, thunder rolled across the mountains, and with it, the revolution began. Within hours, the uprising spread like wildfire. Cane fields erupted in flames. Plantations, once symbols of French wealth, were reduced to ash. The enslaved struck down overseers, shattered chains, and armed themselves with whatever they could seize: machetes, farming tools, stolen muskets. In days, over 1,000 plantations burned, and the colony descended into chaos. The French colonists were caught off guard. They had believed themselves untouchable, protected by fear and military force. They had underestimated the will of those they oppressed. By sheer numbers, the enslaved outmatched them. And now, fueled by fury and faith, they fought not just for survival, but for liberation. News of the revolt shocked the world. Paris was already consumed by its own revolution, debating rights and equality in the salons of the Enlightenment. While across the Atlantic, the very men and women France had enslaved demanded to make those promises real. Other colonial powers watched with fear. If slaves in Saint-Domingue could rise, what would stop the enslaved in Jamaica, Cuba, or the American South from doing the same? The rebellion was merciless. For the enslaved, it could be nothing else. Centuries of torture, rape, and dehumanization exploded into violence. For the French planters, it was a nightmare, their world collapsing in fire and blood. For the enslaved, it was justice long denied. But this was not just vengeance. It was the birth of a revolution that would shake empires. The uprising at Bois Cayman was the first great blow against slavery in the modern world. It was proof that the oppressed could rise, organize, and fight, not just for their lives, but for their freedom. From the ashes of burned plantations rose leaders who would soon command armies, men and women who had once been denied even their own names. Out of the smoke of rebellion, one figure in particular would soon emerge. A former slave with the mind of a strategist and the heart of a leader. Toussaint Louverture. The world would soon know his name. But it began here, in a forest clearing under the storm, where drums beat like war cries, and the enslaved swore before heaven and earth that they would never again bow to chains. The Pearl of the Antilles was on fire, and the fire would not go out until a new nation was born. In the smoke of burning plantations and the cries of revolution, one man began to stand out. His name was François-Dominique Toussaint, later known to history as Toussaint Louverture, the opening, the one who would carve a path where none had seemed possible. Toussaint had been born around 1743 on the Breda plantation near Cap Français. Unlike most enslaved Africans, he learned to read and write, taught by a sympathetic priest and exposed to books of philosophy, military history, and medicine. He studied Julius Caesar's campaigns, read Enlightenment texts, and absorbed ideas that were radical for a man in chains: liberty, strategy, leadership. Even before the revolution, Toussaint had already been freed and worked as a coachman, a position that allowed him to move, observe, and quietly build connections. When the uprising of 1791 erupted, Toussaint did not immediately rush into battle with a machete. He waited, watched, and planned. He understood something the French and even many of the rebels did not. This war would not be won by fire alone. It would take discipline, organization, and vision. And he had all three. Toussaint began by organizing small bands of fighters, drilling them with a precision learned from studying European armies. His genius was not only in the field, but in diplomacy. He understood that Haiti's struggle existed within a larger global storm. France was in revolution. Spain and Britain hovered nearby, eager to seize the colony. Toussaint maneuvered among them like a master chess player, shifting alliances not out of betrayal, but out of loyalty to one cause: the freedom of his people. At first, he aligned with the Spanish in Santo Domingo, fighting against the French. But when, in 1794, revolutionary France abolished slavery across its colonies, Toussaint pivoted. He pledged his allegiance to the French Republic, not to Paris, not to the white colonists, but to the principle of emancipation. With that shift, he gained weapons, legitimacy, and the chance to crush his enemies. By the late 1790s, Toussaint Louverture had transformed ragtag groups of enslaved rebels into a disciplined army. His troops marched in formation, used guerrilla tactics in the mountains, and carried out campaigns that astonished European generals. He was called the Black Spartacus, and even his enemies admitted his brilliance. Napoleon Bonaparte himself would one day name him the most formidable general of his age. But Toussaint was more than a warrior. He was a statesman in the making. As French, British, and Spanish forces fought over Saint-Domingue, Toussaint consolidated power. He reopened plantations, not as instruments of slavery, but as sources of economic survival. He encouraged trade, negotiated with foreign merchants, and tried to balance the fragile society being born from ashes. His leadership was pragmatic, at times harsh, but always aimed at one goal: ensuring that the freedom gained would never again be taken away. In 1801, he took a daring step. Toussaint issued a constitution for Saint-Domingue. It declared him governor for life and, most importantly, guaranteed the permanent abolition of slavery. It was a radical statement. Here, in the richest colony of the New World, once the heart of slavery, freedom was law. He still recognized France's sovereignty in name, but the truth was clear. Toussaint was building an independent state in all but title. This audacity alarmed Europe. For Napoleon, now the rising ruler of France, Toussaint was more than a nuisance. He was a threat. A black leader commanding a successful colony, proving that enslaved people could not only rebel, but govern. To European empires, it was a dangerous example, one that could inspire uprisings across the Americas. And so, Napoleon acted. In 1802, he sent a massive expeditionary force of 40,000 troops under his brother-in-law, General Charles Leclerc, to crush Toussaint, restore order, and, though it was rarely said aloud, bring back slavery. At first, Toussaint resisted fiercely. His armies knew the terrain, fought with ferocity, and refused to bow to the invaders. But through deceit and betrayal, the French captured him in June 1802. Shackled and shipped across the Atlantic, the man who had once commanded an island was locked away in a freezing stone cell at Fort de Joux in the French Alps. There, isolated, sick, and alone, Toussaint Louverture died on April 7, 1803. But before his death, he left words that would echo through history. They have cut down the trunk of the tree of liberty, but its roots are deep and strong, and they will grow again. He was right. His body perished in exile, but his spirit remained in Saint-Domingue. His vision of liberty took root in the soil, in the hearts of those who had fought beside him. And his death did not end the revolution. It ignited it. Within a year, his generals and followers would carry his dream to its final victory, not only defeating Napoleon's army, but giving birth to something the world had never seen before: a free Black Republic. But for now, the island mourned its leader. Toussaint Louverture, the Black general, the strategist, the statesman, was gone. And yet, in the mountains of Haiti, his prophecy was already beginning to bloom. When Toussaint Louverture was taken away in chains in 1802, the French thought they had cut off the head of the revolution. They believed the dream of liberty would die in a frozen cell in the Alps. But Toussaint's prophecy proved true. The roots of freedom were too deep, too strong. And in the fertile soil of Saint-Domingue, they grew into something the world had never seen before. Leadership of the rebellion passed to Jean-Jacques Dessalines, one of Toussaint's most trusted generals. Dessalines was not a philosopher or diplomat. He was a fighter, tough, relentless, forged in the cruelty of the plantations. If Toussaint was the strategist who built the foundations, Dessalines was the hammer that would strike the final blow. By 1803, the French expeditionary force sent by Napoleon had collapsed under the weight of war, tropical disease, and relentless resistance. Yellow fever killed more soldiers than bullets. French morale shattered as their once proud armies were ambushed in the mountains, harassed by guerrilla fighters and betrayed by the very land they sought to control. Napoleon, stretched thin by wars in Europe, could not hold on. The final confrontation came on November 18, 1803, at the Battle of Vertières. Dessalines' army, composed of former slaves, faced the remnants of Napoleon's troops in a bloody clash. The air was filled with smoke and the thunder of cannons. But the enslaved turned soldiers fought with a ferocity born of centuries of chains. When the battle ended, the French were broken. Saint-Domingue, once called the Pearl of the Antilles, was no longer France's colony. It was free. On January 1, 1804, in the city of Gonaïves, Dessalines stood before his people and declared independence. He did not call the nation Saint-Domingue, the name imposed by France. He chose instead a word older, deeper, Haiti, from the Taino tongue, meaning land of high mountains. By reclaiming the island's original name, Dessalines anchored the new nation not in slavery or colonialism, but in memory and dignity. The declaration was radical. Haiti was not just another colony breaking away, it was the first free Black republic in the world, the first nation born from a successful slave revolt. It was the second independent country in the Americas after the United States. But unlike the US, Haiti's freedom had been wrestled from the heart of bondage itself. The impact was seismic. Across the Americas, enslaved men and women heard whispers of Haiti and dared to dream. To European empires, Haiti was a nightmare, a living proof that their entire system of slavery could be destroyed. In Cuba, Jamaica, and the American South, planters tightened their grip in fear of another Haiti. The world could not ignore what had happened on this small island. But freedom came at a terrible cost. The revolution had consumed lives by the hundreds of thousands: Africans, Creoles, French, Spanish, British. Plantations that once fueled the world economy lay in ashes. Cities were scarred. And Dessalines, haunted by the fear that France might one day return to enslave them again, made a brutal decision. He ordered the massacre of most remaining French colonists on the island. For him, it was the only guarantee that Haiti would remain free. For history, it remains one of the most controversial acts of the revolution, an act of vengeance, of trauma, and of ruthless survival. Still, in that moment, under the Caribbean sun, a miracle had occurred. A people who had once been branded as property, who had been chained, whipped, and told they were less than human, had defeated one of the greatest military powers in the world. They had written a chapter of history that no empire had ever imagined possible. The birth of Haiti was more than political independence. It was a declaration to the world. Liberty was not reserved for the white, the rich, or the European. Liberty belonged to all. Yet the joy of that day carried shadows. Dessalines knew the new nation would not be welcomed with open arms. The great powers of the world, France, Britain, Spain, and even the United States, looked on Haiti not with admiration, but with fear and hostility. They would punish the new republic with isolation, embargoes, and demands for reparations that would cripple its economy for generations. But that was still to come. On January 1st, 1804, as voices rose in song and drums echoed with triumph, Haiti stood tall against every chain, against every whip, against every empire. It had survived. It had not only survived, it had been reborn. From Haiti, the land of mountains, rose Haiti, the land of freedom. Independence in 1804 was a triumph without precedent. But the birth of Haiti did not erase the scars of slavery, nor did it magically bind its people into unity. Freedom had been won through fire and blood. But governing that freedom proved a far more fragile task. At the head of this new nation stood Jean-Jacques Dessalines, the general who had led the final charge against the French. On October 8, 1804, he crowned himself Emperor Jacques I of Haiti, determined to rule with the strength of an iron fist. To Dessalines, a centralized authority was the only way to protect the fragile independence of a country surrounded by hostile powers. Yet his reign was steeped in contradictions. He was celebrated as a liberator, but also feared as a tyrant. He redistributed some lands to soldiers and former slaves, but he also sought to keep plantations running under a system of forced labor, believing Haiti's survival depended on maintaining its export economy. For a people who had fought to break chains, this felt dangerously close to the return of bondage. In 1806, only 2 years after independence, Dessalines was assassinated in a conspiracy led by his own generals. His death tore open the fragile unity of the nation. Out of the chaos emerged two rival visions of Haiti, one in the north, the other in the south. In the north, power fell to Henri Christophe, a brilliant but authoritarian leader who declared himself King Henri I. Christophe built a monarchy inspired by Europe, complete with nobility, titles, and a royal court. He enforced strict labor laws, requiring peasants to work the fields under military-style discipline. His system produced stability and revenue, but at the cost of resentment. To enforce his vision, Christophe raised massive fortresses, the most famous being the Citadelle La Ferrière, an imposing stone fortress perched high in the mountains, a symbol of pride, but also of fear. Meanwhile, in the south, Alexandre Pétion, a mulatto general of mixed African and European descent, declared a republic, Pétion offered a very different vision. He distributed land to peasants, allowing them to cultivate small plots for themselves rather than labor on large plantations. This earned him loyalty from the rural population, but weakened Haiti's economy. The export system collapsed, and while Christophe's north grew wealthier under authoritarian control, Pétion's south became poorer, though freer in spirit. These two Haitis reflected deeper divides: racial, social, and economic. The north, dominated by black elites and former soldiers, upheld a model of centralized power and order. The south, led by the mulatto elite, leaned toward liberal ideals but was plagued by instability. Between them lay mistrust, resentment, and the memory of wounds that had never healed. The division lasted until 1820, when Christophe, suffering from illness and facing rebellion, took his own life with a silver bullet rather than be captured. Shortly afterward, Pétion also passed away, leaving the country to be reunified under Jean-Pierre Boyer, another leader of mixed heritage. For a moment, unity seemed restored. Under Boyer, Haiti even expanded, taking control of the entire island of Hispaniola in 1822. But the earlier fractures between North and South never truly vanished. They left scars that would echo through Haiti's political life for generations. A nation always balancing between the need for order and the desire for liberty, between the pull of the past and the demands of survival. The irony was bitter. Haiti had defeated the greatest empire of its age. But the real battle, building a stable and just nation, was only beginning. The revolution had united Haitians against slavery. But once that enemy was gone, the divisions of color, class, and vision resurfaced. And beyond its borders, new storms gathered. France had been defeated militarily, but it was not finished. Soon, it would return, not with armies, but with an ultimatum. And this time, the weapon would not be cannons, but debt. By the 1820s, Haiti was reunited under Jean-Pierre Boyer, a leader who sought to stabilize the fragile nation and prove to the world that Haiti could survive beyond the revolution. But his ambitions went further than simply holding together the western half of the island. Boyer looked east, toward the Spanish side of Hispaniola, the territory that would one day become the Dominican Republic. The eastern half of the island had its own turbulent history. Spain had long abandoned it as a priority, leaving behind a sparsely populated colony with cattle ranches, small farms, and scattered towns. In 1821, inspired by the wave of independence movements sweeping Latin America, the eastern elites declared their own freedom from Spain, calling it the Republic of Spanish Haiti, and hoping to join Gran Colombia, the federation envisioned by Simón Bolívar. But that independence lasted only weeks. In early 1822, Boyer marched his Haitian army into Santo Domingo. There was little resistance. Many welcomed him as a liberator, believing Haitian rule could protect them from Spain's return. For Boyer, the annexation was more than opportunism. He saw it as part of a larger Afro-Caribbean project to unify the island, abolish slavery everywhere, and strengthen Haiti against colonial threats. In one sense, his vision was realized. Under Haitian rule, slavery was abolished in the East. Enslaved men and women in Santo Domingo found freedom under the same flag that had once flown over the battles of Toussaint and Dessalines. It was a remarkable expansion of Haiti's revolutionary legacy. But reality on the ground was far more complicated. The people of the East had deep cultural differences from their Western neighbors. Their language was Spanish, not French or Creole. Their religion was closely tied to the Catholic Church, which resented Haitian reforms that stripped away its privileges. Their economy revolved around small landholdings and cattle, not the plantation system Boyer tried to impose. Haitian administrators introduced new taxes and forced labor requirements, which angered many in the East. Lands were redistributed in ways that benefited Haitian elites, fueling resentment. Soldiers stationed in Santo Domingo were often seen not as protectors, but as occupiers. The dream of Afro-Caribbean unity clashed with the reality of cultural, religious, and economic division. For 22 years, from 1822 to 1844, the island remained united under Haitian rule. But beneath the surface, opposition was growing. A secret society called La Trinitaria, led by Juan Pablo Duarte, began to organize for independence. They envisioned a nation distinct from Haiti, rooted in Spanish heritage and Catholic tradition. On February 27, 1844, the dream became reality. With gunfire echoing in the streets of Santo Domingo, the Dominican Republic was proclaimed independent. The Haitian troops withdrew, and after more than 2 decades, the island was once again divided in two. The split was not peaceful. For decades afterward, Haiti and the Dominican Republic clashed in wars, border skirmishes, and bitter rivalry. Each side carried its own vision of identity. Haiti as the proud Black Republic born of revolution. The Dominican Republic as a nation tied more closely to Hispanic culture. The fault lines of race, language, and history, carved deep during those years, continue to shape relations between the two nations even into the present. For Haiti, the failure to hold the island was a blow to Boyer's dream of unity. Worse, it deepened internal tensions back home. Resources spent on the East drained the West. Farmers resented the burdens of taxation and forced labor. By 1843, Boyer himself was overthrown, exiled from the land he had tried to hold together. The episode revealed a painful truth. Haiti had defeated the greatest military power of its time, but it could not escape the complexities of identity, culture, and economics that divided even its closest neighbors. Independence had freed Haiti from France, but unity, true unity, remained elusive. And soon, an even greater challenge loomed. France, humiliated by its defeat, was ready to exact a different kind of revenge. If they could not conquer Haiti by arms, they would enslave it through debt. Military victory had given Haiti its freedom. But political reality would soon shackle the young republic in another way, through the silent, crushing chains of debt. When Haiti declared independence in 1804, the great powers of the world recoiled. To Britain, Spain, and especially the United States, nations built on slavery, Haiti was a dangerous precedent. If enslaved people in Saint-Domingue could win freedom, why not in Jamaica? Why not in Cuba? Why not in the cotton fields of Georgia? Haiti was treated not as a legitimate nation, but as a contagion that had to be contained. No European empire officially recognized Haiti. Ships were barred from trading in its ports. Diplomats stayed away. The world that preached liberty and fraternity turned its back on the first Black Republic, isolating it in a cage of silence. But France, humiliated by its defeat, had a plan. It could not retake Haiti by arms, but it could make Haiti pay for its freedom with gold. In 1825, King Charles V of France sent a fleet of warships to Port-au-Prince with a chilling ultimatum. Either Haiti would pay reparations to former French slaveholders, or the cannons would open fire. The demand was staggering: 150 million gold francs, an amount so vast it dwarfed Haiti's entire economy. It was, in essence, payment for the crime of being free. Haitian leaders faced an impossible choice: refuse and risk another war with a European empire, accept and doom the country to generations of poverty. President Jean-Pierre Boyer, desperate to secure international recognition and protect Haiti from invasion, agreed. Haiti would borrow money from French banks at punishing interest rates to pay the indemnity. What followed was a new kind of slavery. For over a century, Haiti's economy was drained to pay this debt. Farmers were taxed heavily, forced to hand over portions of their crops. Schools, roads, and hospitals were neglected because every coin was funneled across the Atlantic. Historians estimate that the indemnity, combined with interest, cost Haiti the modern equivalent of tens of billions of dollars, a sum that crippled its development for generations. And yet France, and later the United States and other powers, framed Haiti not as a victim, but as unstable and irresponsible. They ignored the fact that Haiti's poverty was manufactured, engineered by policies designed to keep it weak and dependent. The injustice was bitter. The United States, a republic born of revolution, refused to recognize Haiti until 1862, nearly 60 years after independence, and only when it was itself in the midst of its civil war. For slaveholding America, acknowledging Haiti was too dangerous, too close to home. Isolation had consequences beyond economics. Haiti was cut off from international trade, forced into unfavorable agreements, and denied the legitimacy every nation needs to survive. Its leaders grew desperate, its people bore the brunt, and corruption seeped into the cracks. And yet, even in the face of this strangulation, Haiti endured. Its farmers cultivated small plots, feeding their families and communities. Its culture flourished through voodoo ceremonies, music, and art. Its people held on to dignity even as the world tried to bury them under debt and silence. But the weight was undeniable. The promise of 1804, the radiant triumph of the world's first Black Republic, was shackled by an invisible chain. Every Haitian child born in the 19th century entered a nation already paying for the freedom their parents had fought for. The revolution had ended slavery, but France had found another way to keep Haiti on its knees. By the end of the century, Haiti was exhausted, free in name, yet suffocated in practice. And in the 20th century, that exhaustion would open the door to new storms: foreign occupation, coups, and the rise of brutal dictators. The empire had lost the battle, but through debt and isolation, it had managed to wound the nation that once defeated it. And Haiti, though unbroken, was left to struggle under a burden no young country could carry alone. By the dawn of the 20th century, Haiti was weary. The revolution had given it freedom, but a century of debt and isolation had drained its strength. The economy struggled, governments rose and fell in dizzying succession, and the dream of stability felt always out of reach. Between 1911 and 1915 alone, Haiti saw 7 different presidents, most of them toppled by coups, conspiracies, or bullets. Politics was less a path to governance than a battlefield where rivals fought for power, while the people endured the consequences. In the countryside, peasants worked small plots of land, eking out survival, while corruption and elite rivalries consumed the capital. The instability did not go unnoticed. The United States, whose banks had invested heavily in Haiti, watched with growing concern. Washington feared that European powers, Germany in particular, might step into the chaos and gain a foothold in the Caribbean. And so, when violence peaked in 1915 with the brutal lynching of President Vilbrun Guillaume Sam, the Americans made their move. On July 28, 1915, U.S. Marines landed in Port-au-Prince. They claimed their mission was to restore order and protect American lives and property. In reality, it was the beginning of a 19-year military occupation that would reshape Haiti's politics, its economy, and its relationship with the world. At first, some Haitians welcomed the presence of the Marines, hoping they would bring stability. Roads and bridges were built, ports modernized, and some institutions professionalized. But the occupation quickly revealed its true nature. The Americans controlled Haiti's finances, rewrote its constitution, and ensured that U.S. corporations had access to Haitian resources. The new Constitution of 1918, drafted under U.S. pressure, allowed foreigners to own land in Haiti for the first time since independence. To Haitians, this was an insult, a reversal of one of the revolution's core principles, that the land belonged to its people, never again to colonial masters. Resistance flared. In the countryside, rebels known as cacos, many of them peasants, rose against the occupation. They saw the Americans not as peacekeepers, but as invaders, a new form of colonizer. Led by the charismatic Charlemagne Peralta, the cacos fought a guerrilla war, ambushing Marines and rallying rural communities. Peralta became a symbol of defiance, declaring, "I am fighting for the freedom of my country. Death is nothing when one dies for one's country." For years, he resisted, until 1919, when he was betrayed, captured, and executed by U.S. forces. His body was tied to a door and displayed in public as a warning, but the photograph of his crucified pose only cemented him as a martyr in Haitian memory. The occupation brought order of a kind, but it was the order of the bayonet. Forced labor policies reintroduced a system that felt eerily close to slavery. Thousands of peasants were compelled to build roads under harsh conditions. Those who resisted faced beatings, imprisonment, or worse. For a nation born in rebellion against forced labor, this was a cruel echo of its past. By the 1930s, international criticism of the occupation grew louder. In Haiti itself, intellectuals, workers, and peasants called for an end to foreign control. The United States, facing its own Great Depression and global scrutiny, began to withdraw. In 1934, after nearly 2 decades, the last Marines sailed away. But they left behind a transformed Haiti, centralized, militarized, and scarred. The U.S. had trained and empowered a new Haitian army, one that would dominate politics for decades to come. The seeds of dictatorship had been planted, and soon they would bear bitter fruit. The early 20th century was a paradox for Haiti. It glimpsed modernization, but endured humiliation. It tasted stability, but at the cost of sovereignty. The revolution had promised freedom, yet foreign boots once again marched through its capital. The question now was whether Haiti could reclaim its destiny, or whether the structures left behind by the Americans would trap it in cycles of authoritarian rule. And soon, that question would be answered by the rise of a man whose name would become synonymous with terror: François Duvalier, Papa Doc. When the U.S. Marines departed in 1934, Haiti regained its formal sovereignty. But what they left behind was a centralized army, a fragile state, and a political system that leaned more on force than on trust. In the decades that followed, instability returned. Coups, short-lived presidencies, and bitter rivalries among elites. By the mid-20th century, Haitians were exhausted. Many longed for a strong leader who could restore order, even if that order came at a cost. That leader emerged in 1957, François Duvalier, a physician and former public health official. At first, he seemed an unlikely dictator. Known as Papa Doc for his campaigns against disease in rural areas, he styled himself as a man of the people, a quiet intellectual with wire-rimmed glasses and a calm demeanor. But appearances can be deceiving. Once in power, Duvalier transformed himself into something far darker. He dismantled democratic institutions, silenced opposition, and declared himself president for life. To enforce his rule, he created a dreaded paramilitary force, the Tonton Macoutes. Dressed in straw hats and sunglasses, armed with machetes and guns, they patrolled the streets as the regime's eyes and fists. They killed, tortured, or disappeared anyone suspected of disloyalty. To Haitians, the Macoutes were a nightmare come alive, a constant reminder that fear was the new law. Papa Doc understood power not only as politics, but as theater. He wrapped himself in the imagery of Vodou, presenting himself as a mystical figure, even likening himself to Baron Samedi, the Vodou spirit of death. His speeches blurred the line between religion and politics, convincing many that he was untouchable, perhaps even immortal. Through terror and superstition, he turned the presidency into a cult of personality. While the countryside starved, Duvalier enriched himself and his loyalists. Millions of dollars in foreign aid disappeared into the pockets of the regime. Hospitals crumbled, schools closed, and infrastructure collapsed. But the image of Papa Doc, stern, omnipresent, godlike, remained unchallenged. For ordinary Haitians, survival meant silence. When Duvalier died in 1971, the country hoped for relief. Instead, the nightmare continued. Power passed to his 19-year-old son, Jean-Claude Duvalier, known as Baby Doc. Unlike his father, Baby Doc had no aura of mysticism. He was young, indulgent, and disconnected from the suffering of his people. Yet he inherited the same machinery of terror. Baby Doc's rule was less brutal in spectacle, but equally corrosive. Corruption flourished on an even grander scale. Luxury cars rolled through Port-au-Prince, while peasants went barefoot in the mountains. Foreign aid and loans poured in during the Cold War, as Western powers saw Haiti as a bulwark against communism. But the money rarely reached the people. Instead, it funded the extravagance of the Duvalier family and their inner circle. By the 1980s, the cracks in the dynasty were impossible to ignore. The economy was collapsing. International outrage grew over human rights abuses. The Haitian people, emboldened by desperation, began to rise. Students protested. Workers struck. Priests, inspired by liberation theology, preached against injustice. The streets filled with chants, "Abba Duvalier, down with Duvalier." Finally, in 1986, after nearly 3 decades of dictatorship, the people's rage could no longer be contained. Baby Doc fled the country on a U.S. plane, exiled to France with his fortune. Haitians poured into the streets, tearing down statues of the Duvaliers, burning their portraits, and reclaiming their voices. But the end of the dynasty did not mean the end of its shadow. The Duvalier era left behind a nation traumatized, institutions hollowed out, and a culture of fear that would take generations to undo. Even after their fall, the memory of the Macoutes haunted the people, a reminder of how fragile freedom can be when terror wears the mask of leadership. For nearly 30 years, the Duvaliers had ruled Haiti not by love nor by law, but by fear. And fear, once rooted, does not vanish easily. The people had broken their silence, but the path to true democracy would prove far more difficult than chasing a dictator onto a plane. The revolution of 1804 had promised liberty. The Duvalier years had turned that promise into a bitter echo. And as Haiti stepped into the late 20th century, it faced the same question that had haunted it since independence. Could a nation born of fire and blood ever find peace and justice? The next chapter would bring hope, A new face, a new voice, a promise of democracy. But Haiti had learned before, promises can be as fragile as paper in the wind. The fall of the Duvaliers in 1986 was a moment of euphoria. Crowds danced in the streets, tearing down the iron symbols of fear. For the first time in decades, Haitians felt they could breathe. But the shadow of dictatorship does not disappear overnight. Haiti stepped into a new era, not with stability, but with uncertainty. What followed was chaos. Military juntas took power, promising reforms and elections, but delivering repression. In 1987, when Haitians lined up to vote in what was supposed to be their first free election, soldiers opened fire on polling stations. Dozens were killed. Ballots were left soaked in blood. Democracy once again felt like a dream snatched away. Yet out of this turbulence emerged a voice that seemed different. Jean-Bertrand Aristide, a former Catholic priest from the slums of Port-au-Prince, preached not only from the pulpit, but from the streets. To the poor, he was Titid, a nickname that carried affection and intimacy. He denounced the military, the corrupt elite, and the lingering legacy of Duvalierism. His sermons invoked Jesus not as a distant savior, but as a revolutionary who stood with the oppressed. He spoke in Creole, the language of the people, not the French of the elite. In December 1990, Haitians finally voted freely. And they voted overwhelmingly for Aristide by more than 60%. It was a stunning victory, not just for a man, but for the hope that Haiti could finally be governed by one of its own, someone who carried the voices of the poor. But hope in Haiti has always been fragile. Only 7 months later, in September 1991, Aristide was overthrown in a coup led by General Raoul Cedras. Soldiers stormed the palace. Aristide was whisked into exile, and the dream of democracy was drowned in blood. The army unleashed terror on his supporters, massacres, disappearances, and repression that forced tens of thousands to flee the country. International outrage followed, and the United States, fearing a flood of Haitian refugees and unrest in its backyard, intervened. In 1994, under the banner of Operation Uphold Democracy, U.S. troops restored Aristide to power. For a brief moment, it seemed like the dream could be revived. But Aristide returned changed. He was cautious, pragmatic, more constrained by international demands than before. He completed his term, stepped down in 1996, the first peaceful transfer of power in Haiti's history, and handed the presidency to his ally, René Préval. It was a milestone, but stability remained elusive. In 2000, Aristide returned to power, again winning elections. But this second term was different. Allegations of corruption multiplied. His government faced violent opposition, and gangs, once loyal to him, spiraled out of control. International aid was frozen, and mistrust deepened. By 2004, the streets were once again filled with protests. Armed rebels marched on Port-au-Prince. Aristide claimed he was kidnapped and forced onto a plane by U.S. forces. Washington insisted he left voluntarily. However it happened, the result was the same. Aristide was gone, exiled to Africa. For many Haitians, Aristide remained a tragic symbol. To some, he was a champion of the poor, betrayed by elites and foreign powers who could not accept a president from the slums. To others, he became just another leader who failed to deliver, caught in the same cycle of corruption and disappointment. What was undeniable was this: the promise of 1990, the moment when the people's voice seemed to matter, had been broken. Once again, Haiti found itself leaderless, fractured, and searching for a path forward. The The tragedy of Aristide was not just his downfall, but the hope he carried. For the poorest Haitians, he had represented dignity. His exile felt like more than the removal of a president. It felt like the silencing of their voice. But even as Aristide faded into exile, new trials awaited. Haiti's fragility would be tested not just by politics, but by nature itself. In 2010, the ground would shake, the city would fall, and the country would suffer one of the most devastating disasters in modern history. The long struggle for democracy had been interrupted once more, and Haiti was about to face a catastrophe that would scar it forever. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in Port-au-Prince, January 12, 2010. Children were spilling out of schools, vendors were closing up their stalls, families were gathering for dinner. The city was alive with its usual rhythm of traffic, laughter, and fatigue. And then, at 4:53 p.m., the earth itself turned against them. A 7.0 magnitude earthquake struck just 25 kilometers from the capital. In less than 40 seconds, centuries of struggle and survival were buried under dust and rubble. Buildings crumbled like sandcastles. The National Palace, a symbol of the state, folded in on itself. Hospitals, schools, and churches collapsed, trapping thousands. Streets split open. Clouds of chalky dust turned day into night. The human cost was staggering. Over 230,000 people were killed. More than 300,000 were injured, and nearly 1.5 million were left homeless. Entire neighborhoods became graveyards. Parents carried lifeless children in their arms. Survivors clawed at concrete with bare hands, desperate to reach loved ones still trapped. In some areas, the cries for help continued for days, slowly fading into silence. The world watched in horror. Images of the disaster spread across television screens. Children wandering alone, bodies lined in the streets. Rescuers digging through ruins with nothing but shovels and determination. Within hours, aid pledges poured in from every corner of the globe. Planes full of supplies, doctors, and volunteers landed in Port-au-Prince. For a moment, it seemed the tragedy might finally awaken the world to Haiti's plight. But hope soon gave way to frustration. The aid was massive, but the coordination was chaotic. Relief supplies piled up at the airport, blocked by bureaucracy, mismanagement, or corruption. Foreign organizations often bypassed Haitian institutions, delivering help on their own terms and weakening local capacity. Billions of dollars were pledged, yet much of it never reached the people who needed it most. Meanwhile, life in the ruins was unbearable. Families lived in makeshift camps of tarps and sheets, packed together under the blazing sun and heavy rains. Clean water was scarce, diseases spread quickly, and women and children faced abuse in the chaos. Haiti had already been fragile. Now it was broken. And as if the earthquake was not enough, a new catastrophe struck. In October 2010, UN peacekeepers from Nepal, stationed in Haiti after the quake, inadvertently introduced cholera into the country's rivers. The disease spread with merciless speed, infecting hundreds of thousands and killing more than 10,000 people. For a nation already drowning in grief, it was another wound, this time brought not by nature, but by the very international forces meant to protect them. Yet even in this sea of tragedy, Haitians showed the resilience that had carried them through slavery, revolution, and centuries of hardship. Neighbors rescued neighbors. Doctors improvised clinics in the open air. Teachers held classes in tents, refusing to let education die. Musicians played. Voices rose in prayer, and faith endured where hope seemed impossible. Still, the scars were deep. The earthquake destroyed not just buildings, but confidence, trust, and the fragile progress Haiti had been making. Many survivors never saw their homes rebuilt. The promised billions in aid often turned into projects that failed or vanished into foreign accounts. What remained was rubble, memory, and a painful reminder of how vulnerable Haiti remained. In the span of less than a minute, Haiti's heart had been shattered. The nation that had once defied Napoleon now lay buried under its own capital. And yet, like it had done so many times before, Haiti refused to disappear. The earthquake of 2010 was not only a natural disaster, it was a revelation. It revealed the fragility of Haiti's institutions, the deep wounds of poverty, and the indifference of a world quick to pity but slow to change. And as the dust settled, Haiti entered a new decade, not with recovery, but with crisis upon crisis. Because after the quake, after the cholera, after the world's promises faded, another storm was rising. Political chaos, gang violence, and a new era of instability that would test the nation's endurance once more. When the dust of the earthquake settled, Haiti should have been rebuilding. Instead, it slipped into a darker storm. What the tremors had left in ruins, politics, and violence would finish. The billions promised in aid after 2010 rarely reached the Haitian people. International NGOs ran their own projects, bypassing the state, while corruption swallowed much of the money that did arrive. Streets remained broken, homes unrepaired. Disappointment hardened into anger. And in that vacuum of trust, gangs began to rise. Neighborhoods of Port-au-Prince, once fragile but functional, fell under the control of armed groups. They became the real authorities, deciding who could pass, who could eat, who could live. They kidnapped businessmen, aid workers, even children on their way to school. Entire communities were trapped, forced to pay ransom or allegiance. For the poor, daily life became a roulette of fear. Meanwhile, politics unraveled. President Michel Martelly, a former pop singer, came to power in 2011. His charisma brought him popularity, but his administration was plagued by scandals and disputes. When his term ended, chaos deepened. Elections were delayed, contested, or overturned. Stability seemed like a distant dream. In 2017, Jovenel Moïse, a businessman known as the Banana Man for his agricultural background, became president. He promised reform, development, and a break from the past. But Haiti's curse of politics returned. Opposition accused him of corruption, especially after billions from Venezuela's Petrocaribe fund, money meant to rebuild the nation, vanished without explanation. Protests erupted, demanding accountability. Roads were blocked, tires burned, the streets filled once more with chants of betrayal. And then, the unthinkable happened. On July 7th, 2021, armed men stormed the private residence of President Moïse. They shot him multiple times, killing him in his own bedroom. The First Lady was injured, but survived. The assassination shocked the world. But for Haitians, it was another chapter in an endless tragedy. Their president murdered, their democracy shattered, their nation leaderless once again. The power vacuum was immediate and devastating. Gangs expanded further, carving up Port-au-Prince into zones of control. They kidnapped priests during Mass, attacked hospitals, and hijacked food trucks. International organizations warned that millions were facing famine, not from drought or earthquake, but from the inability to move food through gang-controlled roads. Ordinary Haitians suffered most. Mothers searching for rice risked crossfire. Children stayed home from school, classrooms turned into battlegrounds. Families sent desperate voice messages to relatives abroad. They took my brother. They want $100,000. If we don't pay, they'll kill him. For many, exile became the only dream. Haitians took to the sea in fragile boats, hoping to reach Florida. Others walked thousands of miles across Latin America, facing jungles, deserts, and danger, chasing safety that often ended in deportation back to the very place they had fled. The international community watched, alarmed but uncertain. The United Nations sent reports. The US sent envoys. But concrete solutions rarely followed. Some called for a multinational force to stabilize Haiti. Others warned that foreign interventions had always left the nation weaker, not stronger. And so the cycle continued. Crisis after crisis, wound upon wound. A nation in permanent emergency, living at the edge of survival. Yet even here, amidst collapse, Haitians showed defiance. In the face of assassination, earthquake, and gangs, they still sang at funerals, still gathered for church, still painted murals on crumbling walls. Their spirit, once forged in revolution against Napoleon, remained unbroken. But resilience, no matter how strong, cannot substitute for justice. The assassination of Jovenel Moïse remains unsolved. With trails leading to foreign mercenaries, corrupt businessmen, and shadowy networks of power, each unanswered question deepens the despair. Each day of hunger and violence chips away at hope. Haiti, the first black republic in the world, the nation that once stood as a symbol of freedom, now struggles simply to breathe. The irony is unbearable. The land that birthed independence now fights only for survival. And yet, to understand Haiti is to understand this paradox. A country so often betrayed, yet never extinguished. A people abandoned, yet never erased. Because even in permanent crisis, Haitians do not bow. To speak of Haiti in the 21st century is to stand at the edge of memory and possibility. A nation born from the most radical act of freedom, slaves defeating an empire, now drifts between despair and resilience, tragedy and rebirth. Haiti carries the weight of history like a scar carved into the earth itself. From the Revolution of 1804 to the US occupation, from Duvalier's dictatorship to the earthquake of 2010, from cholera to the assassination of Jovenel Moïse, its past is never far behind. To live in Haiti is to feel history pressing on your shoulders every day. Streets bear the names of revolutionaries. Songs echo the cries of ancestors. Murals painted on cracked walls remind children of heroes long gone. And yet, Haiti is not only a museum of pain. It is also a workshop of survival. Walk through Port-au-Prince today and you will see not just ruins, but resilience. Markets spill over with color, mangoes, avocados, bananas, paintings, and beads, all sold by women who rise before dawn to feed their families. Children in crisp white uniforms walk to school, their shoes polished, even if the classroom has no roof. Musicians gather in courtyards, turning grief into song, drumming rhythms older than the Republic itself. Haiti in the 21st century is a paradox. It is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, yet one of the richest in spirit. It is plagued by political crisis, yet sustained by communities that organize when governments collapse. It is dismissed by outsiders as hopeless, yet envied for its defiance, for being the first to declare that freedom was not a gift, but a right. But possibility is fragile. Each new government promises reform, yet corruption persists. International organizations pledge billions, yet ordinary Haitians still go hungry. Gangs continue to control streets, exiling families within their own neighborhoods. For too many, life is measured not in dreams, but in survival. One meal today, maybe another tomorrow. And still, there is something unbreakable here. Haitians do not forget that their ancestors once faced the impossible and won. that a barefoot army defeated Napoleon, that the flag stitched together in 1803 still waves, ragged but proud. That even when empires, disasters, and betrayals try to erase them, they remain. The question is not whether Haiti can endure. It always has. The question is whether the world will finally see Haiti not as a burden, but as a mirror reflecting how power treats the powerless, how promises turn to dust, how resilience is both a gift and a curse. In the face of constant struggle, Haitians remind us of something deeper, that dignity cannot be destroyed by poverty, that memory is a weapon, and that even in the darkest storm, there is music, prayer, and light. So when we speak of Haiti today, we must resist the temptation to define it only by its wounds. Haiti is not just a story of earthquakes and assassinations. It is also a story of art, faith, laughter, and an unyielding belief that tomorrow, somehow, will come. Because to speak of Haiti is to speak of humanity itself, the ability to fall, to suffer, to be betrayed, and still to rise again. And perhaps, in the end, that is Haiti's gift to the world.